In the last 7 days, more than 1 million people have watched this show, the mother of all talk shows. 512,000 watched last Sunday's show, and 502,000 have watched Wednesday's show, which has only been out for 4 days, so that number is going to rise. The interview with the peerless Scott Ritter on the Ukrainian war has achieved 165,000 views, and 66,000 of those were on Facebook, 96,000 were on YouTube, the rest on Twitter and Rumble and so on. That number may rise exponentially because everything that Scott Ritter and I discussed is still an issue this week and will be for many months to come. But the direction of travel in the Ukraine war is perhaps measured by the fact that every single friend of Russia, and I could start at China and end, I don't know where you'd like me to, because as you saw in Astana in the last few days, Russia has friends all over the world. Every single one of their embassies in Kiev have ordered their nationals to leave. So something big is about to happen in the Ukraine war. Something that the friends of Russia know about, but the rest of us do not. Now, we'll be talking about the Ukraine, about sanctions and the absolute zero presence of diplomacy with a very considerable United Nations international expert in the course of the 2 hours of the show this evening. But we'll be talking about the implosion of the British government with the one and only James Melville, a growing force on social media, an independent analyst and freelance writer of the highest rank. He's come from nowhere, well, the East Neuk of Fife, which is almost nowhere for most of you. Not for me, I used to spend lovely times in a caravan there. But James has become an international figure, not least because of his sage-like appearances here on the mother of all talk shows. And there's nothing he doesn't know about what's happening in the Conservative Party. And if there is, I'll fill you in on the details. Here they are. The Conservatives are going to dump Liz Truss next week. That is to say, before Halloween. Actually, long before Halloween. But I thought I'd play safe and give you that choice on the poll, and you should vote on it now. Will Liz Truss be removed before Halloween or before Guy Fawkes night? A note to international viewers, Guy Fawkes was an Englishman who, in the teeth of wide-scale repression of Roman Catholics in England, where nuns and priests were being hanged at Tyburn, now Marble Arch in the centre of London, entered Parliament with the intention, some say good intention, of blowing it up from underneath the House of Lords. Speaking of the House of Lords, I see that rum fellow Tom Watson will now be wearing the ermine, so watch out for his underprivileged revelations about all kinds of things. Many people have been gravely damaged by Tom Watson, and he's now back in a position to gravely damage them all over again. But it's in the House of Commons that the main drama is occurring. They're about to remove Liz Truss, replace her either with Rishi Sunak, the diminutive Indian billionaire who almost bankrupted the country during the COVID epidemic and who was rejected by the members of the Conservative Party only a few weeks ago. But they're going to take the whole matter out of the hands of the members of the Conservative Party, who, as I always say, think that we should be ruling India, not that an Indian should be ruling us. And they're going to make a decision inside the Houses of Parliament itself. The decision will be made by the men in grey suits and women in grey suits nowadays, who are going to go to Liz Truss until her time is up. In fact, she'd need to last until January to not be the shortest lived Prime Minister in the entirety of British political history. And the record holder, George Canning, had the excuse that he died while in office. There's no chance of Liz Truss making January, so you can already consign her to not the dustbin of history, but to an important place in history as the shortest serving Prime Minister in Britain's history. I told you when they picked her, she was a dolt, D-O-L-T, capital D-O-L-T, as thick as mince in a bottle, and by golly, has she proved it over the few days in which she has served as Prime Minister. Her hapless Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng, no need to remember how to pronounce the name, he'll never be heard of again, was consigned himself to the dustbin of history for bringing forward a budget of which the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, wholly approved, indeed had been campaigning on throughout the Conservative leadership campaign. And just for putting it in a mini budget, one which was undoubtedly signed off by the Prime Minister, she sacked him. She said, she lied in her letter that he had decided to step aside. He immediately contradicted her and said, I was dismissed as Chancellor of the Exchequer. This has lost Liz Truss a lot of support from the right of the party, and she never had any support from the centre and left of the Conservative Party, and that's why she's as dead as a dodo. Some newspapers are claiming that it will not be Rishi Sunak that is put in her place. They say it will be somebody called Ben Wallace, who is apparently this man here, according to the Sunday Mail in Scotland, which once sacked me. Well, I don't know if that's Ben Dover, Ben Doon, Ben 10, or Ben from Bill and Ben, or Big Ben, but it sure ain't Ben Wallace. I hope the picture editor of the Sunday Mail is watching. They say that she's going to be removed and replaced by somebody called Ben Wallace. Best remembered by me as the man who said, my ancestors fought you in the charge of the Light Brigade and we're ready to do so again, showing a tremendous grasp of history because the charge of the Light Brigade turned out to be quite a military disaster, even if it has been memorably recalled in poetry. Ben Wallace, a former army man, now I think the Defence Minister, is an unlikely pick to keep the Tories in power, stop the landslide that's going on under their feet in the public opinion polls. 21% currently intend to vote for the Conservatives, and we'll be talking about all of this to James Melville later. Speaking of 21%, that is currently the number of people in the United States who are intent on voting for Joe Biden in 2024 as President of the United States of America. 21% is a lot of insane people. We knew there were a lot of crazy people in the US. We didn't know that it reached 21%. Even if you add the 12% who say they might vote to re-elect Joe Biden, that comes to 33%. And the Democrats are about to face a long dark night of the soul in the midterm elections. As Garland Nixon put it here last week, they are facing a wipeout of biblical proportions. And I think that, as always, Garland is right. And no party could deserve it more than the US Democrats. They have led the world into a tumultuous war in the heart of Europe. They have beggared and destroyed the European economies, and the politicians in Europe are beginning to feel the heat. The centrist government of Italy was the biggest tree in the forest to fall, but it will not be the last. There were mass demonstrations today and yesterday in Germany and in France. And in both cases, the demonstrations were roundly ignored by the media. But this is not 2002. This is not 1982 or 1952. The people know when there are mass demonstrations on the streets of their country, and those demonstrations have several key demands in common. An end to the sanctions on Russia, an end to the war in Ukraine, an end to their government's involvement in the war in Ukraine, and relief for the mass of the people from unemployment, poverty, hunger, and freezing conditions, which people can feel coming in on the north wind, and it's only October. These demonstrations may well change the course of political events. Already, President Macron in France had the temerity to tweet, "We do not want a world war." You might say that no sensible person wants a world war, but Macron was then assailed by the other NATO countries for backsliding, for showing weakness, for encouraging Putin, and all of the familiar tropes. Do you want a world war over whether Kupiansk is in Russia or in Ukraine? I keep asking that question. I never get a satisfactory answer from anyone. Because, of course, Kupiansk has been in 3 different countries in the last couple of 100 years. It matters not a jot to me whether Kupiansk, of which I had never heard, have never seen, can't spell, and have no interest in. I'm not going to see my children incinerated in a world war over Kupiansk. The question is, are you? And if the answer to that is no, then the next question is, what are you going to do about it? Well, in France and Germany, they're taking to the streets. But if there is an anti-war movement left in Britain, if there is a campaign for nuclear disarmament, which was present throughout all of my life from the 1950s until comparatively recently, if there is, they are now moribund, because not a cheep can be heard from them. And as a matter of fact, the British Labour Party today issued a statement in the name of a Mr. John Healey. I know you've never heard of him, but he happens to be in charge of Labour's defence policy. It's difficult to grasp, I know. But he said, Labour is the party of NATO, and our first act will be to convene an audit to make sure that Labour Britain is meeting all of its NATO commitments. A blank check before the hungry are fed, before the poor are clothed, before the cold are warmed. An audit will take place, and Labour will make sure we are meeting all of our NATO commitments. So, if you don't want world war, it's time to get off your backside and do something about it. That's the long and the short of it. Now, are we going to negotiate our way out of this crisis? Or are we going to continue marching in lockstep behind the dotard Joe Biden all the way to the cliff? That's what I'm going to be asking Alfred de Zayas, a veteran diplomat and expert on diplomacy and negotiations, a former United Nations official, an independent man who has been pointing out some important diplomatic facts, not the least of which that caught my eye was that the referenda which installed Hawaii and Alaska in the United States of America were actually flatly, completely illegal. How about that then? Separatism for Hawaii, for Alaska, anyone? Well, there might be some takers for that. Will Liz Truss be removed by Halloween? 51%. Or will it be Guy Fawkes night on the 5th of November? 49%. A bit wider on YouTube. Yes, it will be Halloween, 58%. it will be Guy Fawkes Night 42%. And on Telegram, it's 48% for Halloween and 52% on Telegram think she'll make it to Fireworks Night. So will Liz Truss leave on a broom, flying across our skies into obscurity before Halloween, or will she go up in a puff of smoke before Guy Fawkes Night? That is the question that is posed to you this evening. As I mentioned right at the beginning, the midweek mother of all talk shows is back. And what a spectacular debut. 502,000 viewers. And it's only Sunday. We'll finish that count on Wednesday, just before we go on air. The first hour of the midweek Moats is sponsored. And we met the sponsor on the Wednesday show, and a very fine fellow Ravi is. But the second hour is still available for sponsorship. If you want to put your company, your goods, your services in front of an audience that size, then get in touch with us. For the moment, until the second hour is sponsored, it has to be sponsored by the viewers. So I hope that if you're watching on YouTube, and by the way, subscribe please to my YouTube channel. Still 40% of the people watching this on YouTube have not subscribed to the channel. Please do so. Costs you nothing. Just click the button and you'll get a notification every time I'm going on air. So if you are watching on YouTube, go to the super chat mechanism and make a donation. And if you are not on YouTube, then go to our website, moats.tv, and click on the donate button. As I said, fasten your seatbelts. This is the mother of all talk shows.